Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we have interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mystery of life. I'm your host, Carmen Spaniola, joining you from the lands of the Insilkshan-speaking peoples of the Okanagan Nations, on our small farm just outside of a small town known as Summerland, BC. It's a very exciting time here on the Numinous Podcast because this month I'm featuring forthcoming titles from Ninth House Press. You've already heard about the poetry and prose anthology titled Assembly, Liberatory Words for Revolutionary Times, edited by co-founder Taraneh Erfan. There are 5 more titles coming out this fall on Wednesday, November 4th, 2026, and they are now available for pre-order. There are 2 ways to get the best value out of your pre-order. Number 1, you could buy the Power Reader Bundle. You'll get all 6 titles for 15% off, plus a cute limited edition tote bag, free shipping, and all the pre-order bonuses available from every author. The second way is to buy your pre-order early, because there will be multiple bonus rollouts happening over the coming months on the road to Pub Day. So the sooner you order, the more bonuses you'll get. If you miss those early bird deadlines, you forego those earlier bonuses. So buy early, get more. Just like keep accumulating gifties all summer long without having to lift a finger. The next title I'm delighted to present is called Mother Juniper on Matrescence in Ecological Crisis. It explores the question, what happens when a woman becomes a mother during the slow emergency of our ecological crisis? Matrescence is the developmental transition of becoming a mother. And as far as we can find, this is the first book published that focuses exclusively on the unique psychoemotional context of becoming a mother during a time of climate crisis. Dr.Allie Davis is a licensed therapist, a researcher, and an educator who coined the term maternal eco-distress. Her research has been published in journals including Ecopsychology and Women's Studies International. She teaches at Pacifica Graduate Institute, directs the Maternal Ecopsychology Certification Program for clinicians and birth workers, and serves as associate editor of the Journal of Mental Health and Climate Change, and she runs Southwest Perinatal Counseling. In this book, Allie is drawing on the juniper tree's pioneer species carework as a developmental framework for supporting the earth self that awakens in matrescence. The earth self, which is, you've heard me say it many times on this podcast, the ecological self, the self that is woven into all things. It's grounded in attachment theory, ecopsychology, feminist theory, and depth psychology. And in it, Allie is holding Indigenous ways of knowing and Western science in relationship with each other. Mother Juniper reframes maternal climate distress as an accurate perception rather than pathology, and it offers mothers a developmental framework for moving through ecological crisis. It supports mothers in building earned secure attachment to the earth during matrescence, and it gives perinatal clinicians a language and a framework for the ecological dimensions of maternal care. When I read this submission, I was like, oh my gosh, these are all the strands I've been trying to weave together in my work with attachment, wilderness quests, collapse awareness in my courses, podcasts, and books, animism, the somatics that we do in the Numinous Network, my attachment work. And this clinician has written an entire book about it and grounded it in her relationship with Juniper, one of my dearest allies. Folks who've heard, if you are a regular listener, you've heard how important my grandmother and grandfather juniper trees have been during my relocation to this new land I'm on. And so you will know that when I read this submission, I just thought this is too much synchronicity for us to pass up. I was very excited about it. everybody we all got just totally over the moon excited about it. And I am excited to share the book with you. I can't wait for you to have it in your hands this fall. And I am thrilled to welcome to the show Dr. Allison Claire Davis. So, Allie, what identities do you lead with?
I lead with mother. It's one of my most joyful identities, but I also lead with counselor and researcher and educator. Those are three things that are incredibly important to how I live my life and how I think. And more recently, I'm an author.
Yes,
That's a new one.
introduce us. I'm very excited about it. Yeah, as soon as I saw the title and then started reading through your submission, I was like, oh gosh, I really hope Taranay and Therese also see how important this is. Because as somebody who hosts a couple of calls a month about collapse awareness and like navigating that on a physical, emotional, mental, spiritual level, the number one question that comes up every month is always something about parenting. So I'm thrilled that we'll be publishing your book. Introduce us to it. What's the full title? What's it about? Who is the intended audience?
So the title is Mother Juniper on Matrescence in Ecological Crisis. So it centers this inquiry that I've been living with the last almost a decade now of what happens when someone becomes a mother in the polycrisis. You know, how matrescence is the developmental transition to motherhood. And so in developmental psychology, we know more and more about how mothers change, grow, development, the growing pains they experience in various domains of their lives, but the ecological matrescence has not had a ton of attention. And I think that it's increasingly important in the climate crisis as it is. And so, it's part my journey into and through matrescence, into motherhood and through matrescence, and my eco distress, my climate concern, and looking for support for that, not finding it, and then ultimately finding it in relationship with research and scholarship and other mothers. And it's also part ecofeminist psychology. And so it's a developmental ecofeminist psych approach to how to support mothers through what is always a period of rapid growth ecologically and otherwise, but also within our current context. And so I'm hoping, people who are going through their own transitions or supporting people who are becoming a parent right now might find this book and find it supportive.
Mm. Okay, looking forward to getting more into the details of that. But on a personal level, can you take us back, like before the idea of this book took hold? What happened to you that put you on the path to writing about maternal ecological distress?
Yeah. Well, I in October 2018, I had a roundabouts a 6-month-old, and I was feeding her at night, and also reading an IPCC report on climate change. And, the contrast of nourishing and creating and affirming life, and reading that her childhood had a timeline, that I hadn't really felt somatically. I was also an environmental activist at the time and was very much in relationship with the natural world as someone that helps manage the resources better. And my own movement through matrescence um, shifted that for me to be one that was, I think, deeper and more relational, and one that was also more animist. And I felt the spiritual aspects of everything in my life differently, which um, we've done quite a bit of research on now in terms of spiritual development of mothers. But for me, it was eco spiritual development. And so that threw me into a crisis. And I often think of developmental crises as catalysts, and you need a certain amount of distress to feel that impetus towards growth and change, because there's usually reasons. um, for me, my reasons of not feeling maybe the animacy of all life was grief and a lot of pain. And so it catalyzed me into just talking to people about it. I sought support from a therapist who was really focusing on just self-care, minimize the symptoms, thinking that it was almost, um, thinking that it was a real problem that I was having this hyper focus on climate and asking why couldn't I be supported more developmentally or holistically in this distress? Because it was also giving me so much support. And I wanted to be able to hold those two things for myself together.
So if I'm understanding correctly, it sounds like in your therapeutic relationship with your therapist, they were on the one hand sort of like you should support yourself, but maybe this is more of a mental or emotional problem that is becoming like your trigger to response ratio might be a little out of whack. And so maybe we could throw some more self-care at this. But it sounds like on the other hand, you were already getting so much support from the earth or from your animistic relationship with the earth that you were sort of struggling to hold the two at the same time. Am I getting that?
Yeah. And specifically a juniper tree that was in my backyard at the time. I've since moved, but I found myself, and I realized the relationship, you know, um, came throughout pregnancy, really. It was the beginning of my great slowdown, and I would visit this certain tree quite a lot, but it became something that was so supportive for me in ways that I had yet to understand and was really to be accountable to that relationship brought a lot of questions. And I wanted to
Mm.
explore that with someone. And my therapist wasn't what we call climate aware and didn't have any understanding beyond maybe the perinatal mood and anxiety disorder framework. And I just felt in my body at the time that that approach wasn't correct for what I was experiencing. So I went and looked for something a bit different. I had been an adolescent therapist my whole career. So I was very familiar with the developmental approach to holding some challenging behaviors or challenging experiences and a growth framework. And so I wanted that for myself. And that's when I came upon Dr. Orly Athen's research on matrescence. And it took a while, but I ended up emailing her and saying, I'm experiencing this and I feel like it's really important. And I wanted to see if we might think about the ecological domain of matrescence as well, that has overlap in all these other ones, but what would happen if we foregrounded that and asked those difficult questions about what the climate crisis is creating in mothers in this period?
hmm When you and the team at Ninth House Press, we met with your cover designer, who's a younger Gen Z woman. She asked a great question. You know, she's 23 or something. So she was like, "Can I just clarify, what do you mean specifically by climate panic?" And I just thought, wow, great question, because those of us who this is the water in which we swim for a long time, can use this language quite fluidly, but I'd love to know if you use different terms to characterize the severity of symptoms that people are experiencing. So like, is ecological distress different from climate anxiety? Like, so
Yeah.
how do people distinguish these things from like their regular anxiety or depression or you know postpartum symptoms, and distinguish that from like existential dread? Like
Mhm.
what's the difference? How can you tell?
Yeah. Well, so I had to create some terms to talk about the landscape after talking more with mothers and doing research and thinking developmentally about my experience. So in the core lab at Teachers College Columbia and Orally Athen's lab, we developed the concept of maternal eco distress. And that draws on a long lineage, first by researcher Emmanuel. She was in the nursing field and developed the term maternal distress because she needed and wanted and thought mothers deserved a non pathologizing approach to the experiences of growing pains in this period. And kind of thinking through that maternal distress has almost exclusively, prior to, I think her research was around 2010, um, just looked at through a lens, like a medical lens that was trying to fix the symptoms rather than something that might really value the symptoms and explore, maybe existentially, the deeper meaning and the direction and what that's representing in the mother's life. And so maternal eco-distress is similar. It's this larger umbrella that is meant to hold all forms of distress. And so within that, um, we think about it as a bell curve where, some mothers will have some clinical impairment. There, some functioning needs, and maybe that's an appropriate place for clinical support. I think a lot of matrescence theorists are talking about the messy middle of developmental change as a disorientation and reorientation, and that's not happening at the same time.
Mm.
And so how do we support this space? And maybe we do it non-clinically. And then on the other end of the bell curve, we know that some mothers really flourish through this distress. There's some really, um, to me, fascinating research around attachment styles shifting in the postpartum period. Um, and, its relationship to ongoing caregiving. And so it's a really important umbrella concept that can hold all of this. And so I think I was talking about climate panic to describe that period of there's a lot of biochemical changes, hormonal changes, the neuroplasticity and matrescence is really like priming that attachment focus. Mothers cannot handle the threats to children, in ways that maybe they did before. I have a mom who's made 2 reports in the last couple of weeks at a playground, and they were warranted. But as she was just noticing that it wasn't, she's in the 3rd trimester, but she's like, these things didn't um, feel as threatening in my body even a couple weeks ago. So, all these things are changing simultaneously, and thinking about that distress, for instance, that she's feeling, or that I was feeling around the IPCC report, that's meaningful and purposeful, and it's a sign, an invitation of where I might have needed to grow. And so, I use different words in between them. Another word that I created to describe one presentation is ecophyxia, and it's the concept of I took orthorexia, which is like these really healthy behaviors maybe taken to an extreme. And a lot of times when I see mothers engaging in environmental care work in a way that um, is a fear response, and it's maybe taking over their life. I talk a lot about the third shift of environmental care work, and um, I recently had a mom who had done everything, cloth diapering, covering everything plastic with natural fiber. She changed her job so that she didn't commute. Just so much had changed for her out of this environmental concern. And then I was like, have you, been spending some time in the natural world, with the rest of the living world? And she really hadn't. And so it's coming from that resource management perspective rather than a relational one that is rooted in um, maybe reciprocal care. So she really needed that different lens to understand like the work she's doing is valuable, and also like, she's valuable.
Mm.
And so we see the ecophyxia environmental care work instead of ecological care work as maybe a form of self-erasure, and it might need some support or a different lens.
So when you say there are things like this that might need some non-clinical support, do you mean like go out and sit with a juniper tree? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I'm really supportive of nature therapies, and we've seen more research in the postpartum period of the efficacy of nature therapy, but we also know, the research is pretty supportive of, nature therapy being a really important intervention. And, there's some other kinds of supports like climate cafes. I run a climate cafe that is 1 hour a month of mothers sitting together to share their climate emotions. It's incredibly supportive, and also research backs that quite heavily. We're not moving into solutions. We're being together with our concern to help hold that and honor it. And other forms I think of support are um, shifting our schemas or our frameworks or our worldview around the natural world. And so that's a big part of what this book is doing, is it's offering a framework or an understanding of matrescence and the ecological crisis that has been shown to be supportive in narrative ecotherapy, which I've done and researched and published on. So I do think that there's a lot of ways to support moms, but being in community with the human and more than human world is a big one.
Hmm. I want to ask you about that in a moment, but I have just had this follow-up question come to me. What does the research show generally about being in community, not moving towards solutions? You talk about your climate cafes. I mentioned this is what we do in the Numinous Network every month. And because so many members of the Numinous Network are people who are, they have sensitive nervous systems, right? They have dysautonomia or autoimmunity, or they're in some kind of recovery, or they don't know, they don't have a diagnosis, but they have a very sensitive nervous system, or they have long COVID, something like that. So the worry is that if they come to one of those particular sessions, they might get really flooded. And so we've done special sessions for them that are actually really no different than we just say this is for sensitive nervous systems. But the overwhelming majority of people, when they leave one of these calls, leaves saying, when we say, how are you feeling as you leave the call? What's your aftercare going to be? They inevitably say, I'm feeling uplifted. I'm feeling galvanized. I'm feeling resourced. I'm feeling grounded. I'm feeling connected. I'm feeling, there's just, I hate to use such a, marketable word, but like empowered. I'm leaving feeling empowered. What does the research say about when we come together and we just sit without moving towards solutions, but we just sit in predicament and difficulty with each other? That what does it say about who benefits or how we benefit?
Well, I mean, I think that might draw on a whole lot of research, but I think that one of the things I love about climate cafes is they are, in a lot of ways, the antidote to the worldview or the approach to living that created the crisis that we're being with each other around our concern. And that connection is, to me, a form of spiritual activism or eco-spiritual activism. And there's a lot about changing the narrative and reauthoring our lives and moving into value aligned behaviors that I think are very supportive of mental well-being, but also very supportive of the transformational process of matrescence. Like, how do we start rooting into our daily lives the world we're wanting to dream into being? And so I think that that's the empowering component. And it's a big part of ecofeminist or feminist therapy overall is connection is the antidote to so much of what ails us. And, I think that specifically not moving into solution-oriented behaviors is the solution, because we are nature. And if we're hurting and we're ill or we're feeling just depleted and our capacity is limited, we need support in that. And, that's nature therapy to me. And that's a really important space to sit in instead of maybe using action to not let those feelings and emotions really tell us what direction to go in. So um, I don't know if that gets all the research, little narrative in there, but a little feminist therapy, but yeah, in just so many ways, connection's key to our well-being.
I would love to hear about your connection with this specific grandmother Juniper tree. How did you develop such a deep and strong relationship with her?
Yeah, I'm looking back into my childhood, I always have just felt drawn to trees that had the ability to hold me in various ways. So I had a crabapple tree I'd hide in and observe people in other yards, and I had a willow that I would climb up into and just feel like my own playhouse and such safety there. And I think that in matrescence, particularly the early perinatal period, I needed support that I wasn't getting. A lot of people focus on a child is going to be born, but not the mother is being born. And I found support with stillness with a specific tree that kind of had like a grove around her, but it was hidden from the street. I was a public servant at the time working on environmental issues. I just needed a lot of not being perceived. And so it was a place of safety that I went to just to sit with. And over time, I started to notice ecological, I was not ecologically literate, still have a lot of room to grow there, but I learned some things by observation that I then would research about juniper. And so much wisdom came out of learning about the ecological reality of this tree. And then I would also notice changes in me, both from kind of what I consciously understood, but also what I understand now to be co-regulation and moving towards earned secure attachment with another being. And there was a period of time where the relationship was developing with Mother Juniper that I brought a lot of my attachment wounding, to her, and like, oh, I haven't visited enough, and is this still going to be the same? Will I feel calm and support? All this kind of stuff, and I got to work through that with her, and through observation, became listening. Eventually became communicating and sharing things about myself, my life, my matrescence, you know, um, my human relationships that I felt, that was not a place that I had anywhere else. Even therapy had become the site of me having to advocate and figure out how to advocate for myself because I wasn't feeling seen. So that relationship was really helpful because I say in so many ways the way that I was mothered by her helped me understand how I want to mother in a world that was trying to throw in like a prescriptive identity onto me that was creating a lot of pain. And but also by earning more security um, in relationship to her, I was able to have more security. And like an attachment figure really opens up the capacity to connect with many other beings, and my relationships have changed, human and more than human. And I don't have Mother Juniper around. I have a Chinese elm yeah, that's leaning over my balcony, pine. There's cottonwoods by the creek. All my world has been open to much more support than I understood um, prior to getting to know her, and having her in my life. And there's also been at another home, another Mother Juniper. And it became my girl's grandmother Juniper. And so, that those relational capacities that I'm learning, I'm able to support in a way that I wouldn't have known how to in my kiddos, who I believe kiddos come in with, um, the need for developmental support around their ecological connection, and so that's something that she's still providing and teaching.
I'm just thinking of that. So we just moved to this land just over a year ago. It's my in-laws' land in a totally different ecosystem. It's like high alpine desert, and I come from many generations in a very wet, temperate rainforest. So different, I'm a cedars and ferns kind of person, and here I am in ponderosa pine and juniper country. But there are some Doug firs where we are. And I was walking with my 22-year-old, and there's a particular fir that has a really big boulder beside it. And I just sort of casually said to my kid, oh, and if you ever need a place to cry, you can come here because this is the cry rock. And see how if you sit here, you can just reach out your left hand and hold hands with this fir that's reaching towards you. And I'm sitting holding hands with this fir. I look at my kid, my kid's like, oh, are you okay? I was like, I'm not okay. I'm still grieving, but anyway, it was sweet. It was sweet. Yeah, my kid has always had a very strong relationship as well with the natural world, but I think maybe encountering each other as adults, I think it was a little surprising to them that I'm like, this is my cry rock. and, cry
Well, I
for.
was, this reminding me, I was in a climate aware therapy training maybe 2 weeks ago, and someone was sharing she's trained in search and recovery. And one of the things that they tell children that if you ever get lost, find a tree that calls to you and hug that tree and talk to the tree and, really um, let that elder take care of you until we find you. And so she was thinking about that in so many ways that, trees are so supportive. The idea is, maybe make sure that that kiddo doesn't get more lost and stays in one place, but also is um, taken care of while she or he waits or they wait. So.
Oh, sweet. So I have heard a few people say that it's hard for them to draw spiritual resources from the earth. The attachment wound comes up because there there's this kind of like overwhelming valence towards like the earth has been harmed, the earth has been depleted, I don't want to take. Whereas others, I've heard say, well, the earth is ever renewing and endlessly abundant. So it's like really easy for them to just draw strength. But I get the impression they are less inclined to sit in that tension between depletion and abundance. They're really kind of spiritual bypassing towards, um, we're all going to be okay. We don't actually have to look at this. So where do you land with that when you're connecting with your grandmother Juniper or with the larger earth? And how would you handle that, like clinically, if somebody was struggling?
hmm Yeah, I mean, one thing we could look at is through maybe an attachment lens, but I think maybe I see this dualism in environmental work, period, and I feel like in some ways it's a bit of a mother wound. I think the tension is the point. So Mother Juniper, especially in the high desert, is not like lush, and she's more gnarled and adapted to drought. She doesn't necessarily give ease. Sometimes, like I'm pulling a berry off and I'm getting cut. So I think she offers endurance. Different lessons and. But in the book I talk about good enough Mother Nature, and the earth doesn't have to be this pristine, which, we can kind of critique the concept of wilderness, but pristine wilderness. And, um, I've been in a community that had a historic flood, and we still can connect with a creek. And, the creek was contaminated, which was why I was doing public service around the creek. And we can still connect with the creek and think about what's being asked of us. And the community came together to do riparian area repair. So people that had mowed their St. Augustine all the way down to the creek had completely rearticulated what their backyards would look like and came together with, community members across some pretty harsh political lines. So I think that the repair is a part of that relationship, but also holding the reality of who we're connecting with. And the mother wound might have this understanding of mothers are there to be to give and give, and oftentimes are martyring themselves, or mothers are bad, and put themselves first. And I sometimes see that put on nature. For instance, like we might have a really human-centered perspective that we are there, we're better than nature, we need to manage it, it's messing up, what can we do? And then when people start to shift into a more I am nature, more animist lens, they might say nature is amazing and humans are bad. And it's a critical flip, or uncritical flip of this hierarchy. And so um, we can't really relate to an ideal anyways. I think, when mothers will feel that, they put on a lot of times that mother prescriptive identity is about being put on a pedestal, but not being given any real power or personhood in that experience. And so I think that naming that we're sitting with a harmed earth as harmed people, and staying present to the harm, and being in grief and relationship is important. And I also think that being in relationship with someone who's dying is important too. So sometimes that enters the conversation. And I've done some hospice work, and I also am imperfect, and I'm dying. I'm on my way. I'm valuable, and I am, have a lot to give. And I think that that's important for mothers to center their well-being and their imperfection, and then connect on that level. We can replenish each other with care in our realities, I guess, is another way to say it. Um, in hospice, the relationship with a dying person is vital. It can be life-changing, even though we know a specific outcome is coming. So um, I think that those are my thoughts. Is it's always worth showing up in relationship and being present with reality. And the more we can understand that, I think is how we build intimacy.
Mm. I've never thought of it in that framework. Is it Dave Winnicott or someone, the Good Enough Mother Studies,
Mhm.
but the Good Enough Earth? And for folks who, again, correct me, please, but this is my general synopsis for folks who are not familiar with the Good Enough Mother Studies. But basically, it was like you could be more or less securely attached or present or like a quote unquote good mother like 30% of the time, and that's enough for a functional relationship or like secure attachment with your kid. But the key is like as long as you're there to repair when you fuck up kind of thing, or there's a willingness to repair, then it's not that you have to be like fully present and 100% secure all the time. It's that you can like lose each other and find each other and lose each other and find each other and kind of keep repairing, keep trying to improve. Like there's something important about that. And I remember when I was apprenticing to lead wilderness quests, uh, I did my apprenticeship, a couple of quests in Death Valley. But again, I'm from what Americans call Pacific Northwest, right? Like I'm
Mhm.
from like wet, damp salmon, bear, cedar country. And so that's where I really wanted to do my quest. And I thought, gosh, I don't know if the land in Death Valley can really affirm for me if I'm ready for this or not. And I remember my teacher saying to me, Carmen, if you're going to really be in relationship with the earth, you're going to have to learn to love her in all her faces
Mm.
and be in relationship with all. And it's getting me now. It's like, yeah, that's true. So the idea of good enough nature seems like I like the overlay of those two frameworks. It feels it sits uneasily in my body to turn the good enough mother framework onto myself because of course I want to be the best mother.
Mhm.
It's a lot harder to uh feel it in my body, even though I can understand it intellectually and think, oh, that's really affirming and validating. And yet when I turn the lens on nature, um, yeah, I guess I'm having a lot of feelings thinking about how and where is the quality of my looking very harsh and critical, fairly similar to the gaze upon which I was raised, under which I was raised. So, um, yeah, thank you. Thank you for that framework. I appreciate that.
Yeah, we in one of our articles in ecopsychology, we were talking about hyperlocal nature because local nature and nature therapy is that concept of you know, um, nature therapy is effective in all environments. If you're sitting inside and you're looking at a picture of nature, it's shown to decrease mothers' needs for pain meds following birth. You know, it's just you know, gardening, nature inside, horticulture, in all instances, hyperlocal is wonderful because we do have like, oh, I can't do nature therapy because I can't get away. And that's not, we are nature, and so we can have nature therapy in all situations. And then also in writing this book, I felt called to bring that attachment lens to nature and articulate it in a different way.
Yeah, I was just writing this section in my book about how with ingestion behaviors and contact nutrition, about how I've had some students and clients totally independent of each other, say, who lived alone, say after learning about eating and drinking and how they can play into attachment stuff. I live alone and I do get lonely at mealtime. So I've moved my favorite houseplants to the table so that we're together. And I've never really thought of that as like, oh yeah, that's nature
That's
therapy.
beautiful.
That's ecotherapy.
Yeah.
Isn't that so lovely?
Mhm.
It's very
Yeah.
moving to me.
Yeah, and I just learned that from you about, the eating after these experiences of repair. And I've been thinking about that in relationship to Juniper too, how many times we ate together or I
Oh,
ate, Thunder, but
yeah,
also, I felt called sometimes, to ingest berries and, have some ritual and ceremony around our connection. So I
that's
thought it's really
beautiful.
valuable.
So a lot of people struggle with this question of whether to have children in light of ecological perils. I'm remembering now. Oh yeah, this is where we started. Okay, so a lot of parents struggle with feelings of anxiety and guilt and dread and inner conflict about like how much to share with their kids and when. And even people without kids are grappling with should I have children, right? And all of this again is against that background hum of that question, what will human society on earth look like in 50 years? Like how much human society will be left? There's some people who are very strong adherents to near-term extinction, other people who say, I don't think it's going to be that, but I think we're going to deindustrialize really dramatically. How do you personally decide, given that we don't really know, like how do we decide how much to
Mhm.
share with children and when is it developmentally appropriate? So I'd love to hear your clinical opinion on that. And then I want to hear your personal take. What do you think, Allie? Just as like Allie, person moving through the world, what do you expect life to look like in 50 years for them?
Well, um, I take the approach of a researcher at my former institution did work on racism in children and when to have this conversation and start to help children understand that reality of our world. And I feel that anthropocentrism is similar in that we need to start having those discussions around three. Silence leaves children without language and without like grounding when reality does arrive, and it always does. So I think the same logic holds for multiple of our crises. And so I see my job less about disclosure and just more about, you know, telling them the truth, or at least the truth as I see it when we're having conversations, but also giving them language around to describe their experience and their perception, and maybe some language around um, if they can identify how they're experiencing things and maybe some of their peers even, because you see I talk in the book about the earth mother wound, and I've sat with so many people and trying to decide this aspect of their reproductive identity, and also who have maternal eco distress and matrescence in the perinatal period or postpartum. And um, I think that everybody has a moment where maybe they felt severance from their earth self. And, they can tell me a story of what changed, and it might be um, experiencing themselves different than other kids and feeling that's weird. My own daughter had one in relationship to how people on the playground, other children treated living beings differently than her, and so having those conversations is important. Another little girl that I know, the city just really drastically changed the riparian area around the river, and she lost one of her best tree friends,
Mm.
and her family supported her with a ceremony, and all the children could come, and those experiences are really important. And did anybody advocate with the city afterwards? I know that they did. And then also we need to have guidance on how to grieve things. And in a world that tells us nature's dead and has no agency or life, and we can just use it. So
Mm.
I also foreground relationship before scientific facts. And I think that that's showing up as really vital in research around adolescents and young adults. Um, the ecological self needs developmental support throughout the lifespan. And we support language development, emotional development, social development. And I don't see a lot of, I feel like the ecological development around childhood is underdeveloped in terms of the research. But children come in primed for that, and so we don't give a 2-year-old maybe grammar lessons, but we definitely might put her in relationship to stories and adults who just will talk to her and, kind of sing to her, all this kind of stuff. So I think that relationships, um, really important. And what I found is that becomes in spiritual development and matrescence, we know that the child is often the guide for mother's development. And so having that stance has really given me some growth spurts, and it's centered my children as a developmental catalyst that they are, rather than a lot of developmental theory looks at humans just trying to like fill children as empty vessels. Um, and so they have much, I think, more secure ecological relationships than I do, and so I'm constantly learning from them as a part of the natural world. They have a bit more ease. So I think the second part of your question is what do I think the world will look like in 50 years, or how do I yeah. Well, I think that I have, so many visions of the future, but I think that climate futures are nonlinear is a stance that I typically live within. And, um, I try to lean towards the capacities that I think we all need regardless to kind of build the world that a lot of people are dreaming into existence. And so I've dropped the figure it out strategy for myself. I do it a lot with trauma and triggers. I love research, obviously. But I feel like, it can sometimes give us clarity, but it does keep me in that thinking brain, which is not where the trauma necessarily needs support. And so for me, trying to figure out things in advance almost becomes this maladaptive attempt to protect myself. And so sitting in the unknown is where I find a lot of um, compost. So a lot of discomfort, but a lot of growth potential. And yeah, so I think that mm, yeah, just staying in that relationship first is my strategy without requiring any guarantee. I think that we try to figure that out a lot in relationships to avoid harm. But it's hard enough for me to be in a relationship. So I'm really busy.
Yeah. So I don't need to figure out all the potential things that could go wrong. And I appreciate the language of it being nonlinear. And as you were referring to previously about like hyperlocal, there, as we're always saying, like collapse is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. And throughout history, we've had like people have had to live through the Dust Bowl. People have had to live through great floods, great fires, great, dispossession. Like there's all of the things that we're worried about happening have happened, and people have figured it out. And it hasn't happened to everybody the same way at the same time. So I'm always sort of trying to reassure people, like you're doing the thing. If you're trying to learn how to stay connected, how to have like strong bonds with people, if you're trying to be in reciprocal and mutual relationship, if you're trying to learn how to repair or facilitate groups, if you're trying to learn some hard skills, of course, but also the skills of grief and death and ritual and creativity and play and art and storytelling, like you're doing whatever's going to be needed 50 years from now. So, I'm not saying don't worry about it. Stay on your toes, friends, but like, but yeah. And I'm delighted that folks are going to have your book, which is such a beautiful encapsulation and articulation of the dilemmas that we find ourselves in, the predicaments that we just have to live through. So the last question, as always, we've heard some of your answers already, but along with nurturing your ecological self, the self that's woven into everything else, along with your animist and deep personal relationship with trees, how do you cope with grief and also the rage?
Mhm. Yeah, I think I really try to be gentle with my grief and my rage, and I see all these feelings as all climate emotions as really powerful data, and they run the gamut of uncomfortable to comfortable is how I think about them. You know, um, Deep love and connection with an ecosystem is not necessarily comfortable. So I don't know if there's like a continuum of positive to negative, but grief is a hard one to hold, and so I do move towards the community of human and more than human, and I do a lot with expressive ecotherapy to process my feelings. Like we kind of touched on that with the bottom up processing a minute ago, but it's much more effective for me to kind of move these experiences or sensations in the body in ways that um, feel like they support my growth and my well-being. And
Sorry, when you say expressive ecotherapy, is that like dance, singing,
it can
ritual?
be. Yeah.
Okay.
And so expressive therapy is anything you're doing more.
Mm.
So equine therapy is,
Mhm.
I would say,
Yep.
expressive, but my expressive therapies are more art related.
Mm.
And they might lean more visual art. Um, like I love eco printing and
Mm.
sewing with fabrics that I've worked with. Um, and so, yeah, doing the expressive work with nature and myself as nature, I think is really helpful. I attend climate cafes for myself, and I hold one specifically for mothers because sometimes I feel a bit alienated in spaces that center this experience I'm having, but maybe don't center mothers and birthing people's voices. And
Mm.
so, but in my clinical experience, I think rage is one of the most medicalized in mothers. Is people are really uncomfortable with that. But I have heard a lot around the sacred rage of the feminine, and for me it's become this reason that I do most things. I think I've integrated it as my um what holds me up in some of these harder moments. And I write about in the book heartwood. It's a response a lot of times to environmental stressors, and it becomes this backbone in a way. And so I think rage is a big, and it comes from that relational love, and but also I spoke in my last climate cafe. Every day it pops into my mind. I'm rage filled about fireflies, and that my daughters may never have these like experiences I've had, that where I just felt it's like looking at the stars, just so much wonder and awe because of light pollution and pesticides. And that fueled me to work on dark sky initiatives. And also, that didn't help. It's there. So I'm angry. I'm always going to be angry. And then how can I honor that as a relational capacity of itself? Um, and and so that rage gives me that energy to stay or move towards greater ever accountability to my relationship with Mother Juniper. Um, and my current ecosystem, my biome that's different, which, I'm learning. I'm in the high desert. So not altogether different, but the high desert is a very unique place to get to know and be known. Um, but the rage is why I do a lot of this work. And I think that it helps us stay present, stay grounded, just like Heartwood. So, but I think the other thing that I mentioned earlier is that concept of spiritual activism, and the practice of staying connected to a worldview that can be the healing that we're really grieving and really mad about. So Gloria Anzaldúa introduced me to the concept of spiritual activism, and one of the things she says, it's this daily devotion to um, being interconnected in a way that, like the status quo stories, the world tells me I'm not. And so I have a lot of ritual that I do, to just, even when I might be feeling very disconnected or very hopeless, that I work to really root that value and that knowing that I have, that I'm a part of the nature. I'm part of the living world, and I'm an important part of it. I have something to do here. I might be the wildflower that's just like turning towards the sun. But I'm here to do that. And that is what I talk about in the book as the fruit and the planting seeds. So the book's organized like the body of Juniper. And I think that we do move into action. My spiritual activism is action. And I think that we need to find maybe our ecological niche, which is something I talk about in the book as what is our function within this ecosystem. And as humans, but also as individuals, I think that that's an important question that I'm always in prayer around. So I offer that to others if they feel it's helpful.
I know they will find this helpful. I know that they will find the book helpful. I really appreciate you writing it, and I do hope that I could see how folks could take it and integrate it as like a handbook for spiritual activism. But I do hope that it takes people kind of almost out of the head and into the body and into that place of living that question: what is my ecological niche in the place where I am? So I'm very excited for the book to come out and be on shelves. And thank you so much for spending time here telling us more about it.
Thanks for having me.
The link to pre-order Mother Juniper is in the show notes. Again, I want to encourage you to order the entire catalog of 6 titles. I know it sounds like a lot, but it's just like 1 book a month between now and the fall. You keep the ones you love, you gift the ones that are better for others, right? But I think you're going to want them all, and you're going to save a lot of money that way. Of course, I will also put all of Allie's links in the show notes so you can learn more about her and her other offerings. And I strongly encourage you to sign up for her newsletter so you get updates about her upcoming interviews and appearances. I guarantee you there will be much more coming from Allie Davis in the coming year. And if you'd like to join a bunch of moms who are animists and witches that are tracking climate crisis and collapse in a trauma-informed way, in a somatically based way, in an attachment-oriented way, you should come hang out with us in the Numinous Network, where we host over 50 online drop-in sessions a month. Learn more about the Numinous Network at carmenspagnola.com. CarmenSpagnola. Until next time, take care.